Hello and welcome back to the Life and Nurse podcast. We took a little break last week, but we're back with a little bit more news. I think there was a little bit of a lull in the watch world after Watches and Wonders, so I didn't want to just make an episode for the sake of making it. This episode, we're going to bring you a few of the watches that have been released over the last couple of weeks, kind of post Watches and Wonders. I think there are some interesting things happening, which is always exciting sort of in the modern space. I know the last episode we focused pretty heavily on vintage watches with the auction news, so hopefully this will give you a little bit of a flavor of things to come in the modern side of things. I will say, as you're listening to this podcast, we're gearing up for the Geneva watch auctions. I'm very excited to see how they go. If you are on Instagram, we've obviously been posting a lot of sort of our favorite picks from each of the auctions, and I think there's been some really good response to those posts. There are some really nice pieces that are coming up for sale, and so I hope that you are at least paying attention to what is coming up, and I can't wait for the New York auctions. Those are always really, really fun, and I'm excited to cover those after the Geneva auctions finish. But going back to sort of the main topics for this episode, I wanted to discuss some of the new watch releases. But before we get into that, I will let you know that we are going to be releasing a few more vintage watches we'll be covering on the channel, both our YouTube channel as well as lifeonthewrist.com. So stay tuned for that. We'll have an episode where we discuss those pieces. There are some pretty cool things to come, so stay tuned. All right, we'll kick it off with Bremont. Bremont is kind of in the news and was on Instagram, covered by a lot of people because they sort of marked the start of a new era for the British watch brand. They kind of went through a whole redesign, and have they released the Terra Nova, which was kind of a great example of this sort of redesign that they went through. First, they kind of changed the general aesthetic of the brand. Instead of having the propeller logo that Bremont normally has, they've replaced it with a wayfinder, but they do have sort of a hidden four-bladed propeller inside of that. To try and sort of continue the idea of Bremont's history. They also have started to use a new font, which is a lot thicker, larger, and more contemporary in feeling. These elements sort of make the brand sort of step into the modern world when it comes to the fonts that they use. It is worth noting that they are obviously going to focus pretty heavily on pilot and aviation watches, which with larger and very legible contemporary fonts makes these pieces quite easy to read. They also have sort of released a new mantra, which is higher, further, deeper, faster, which basically focuses the brand on sort of the key elements that go into the watches that they create and the uses for them. The Terra Nova collection was really the biggest evidence of this, where they have released this contemporary field watch that's inspired by military timepieces in the early 20th century, but obviously has these modern elements that Bremont is using. It has a cushion case that is made out of 904L steel, which has a pretty slim profile, tapered lugs, and really is a contemporary cushion case. It's got large blocky Arabic numerals and superluminova on both the hour markers and hands, which is pretty amazing when you look at it. This watch has is kind of like the indicator that this watch is, or the indicator that Bremont is sort of moving into this new sort of aesthetic for the brand. Now, many people on Instagram especially sort of criticize this new rebrand as, not looking extremely close to the aesthetics that they look for. That's, kind of a personal opinion. I think Bremont's trying to step into the modern era, but it's totally fine if you have some sort of criticism for them. I don't think any brand that has gone through sort of a rebranding has won over every single individual. I guarantee that there are people who don't like the aesthetics of Rolex, and that's totally fine. But let's see how Bremont does here. For me, I actually haven't really explored the brand a ton. I will say I actually kind of like the numerals on this watch. If we exclude the idea that Bremont has changed their general aesthetic with how they have designed their dials, I actually kind of like it. I like cushion-formed cases. I like these larger numerals. It does have sort of that faux patina-esque look to it. So overall, I kind of like the aesthetic, the rebrand. I'm not really going to comment because I don't really, I never really was sort of a deep enthusiast for what they had previously. But maybe that's just a hint for me to go back and maybe explore Bremont a little bit more. All right, the second piece of news I want to discuss was a release from Omega. The Paris 2024 Olympics are coming up, and Omega, being the official timing sponsor of the Olympics, has released, I guess, a couple of new chronoscope models for the Summer Olympic Games. They've actually released, I think there's technically 4 versions of these. There's one that's made in moonshine gold with a strap. There's one that's made in moonshine gold with a bracelet. And then there's a steel version with a strap and a steel version with a bracelet. What's really cool is the dial actually has a pulsation dial and runs on a coaxial movement, so it's kind of a cool chronograph iteration. I don't think that these are limited, but I might be incorrect there. And if you obviously flip over the watch, you'll have that Paris 2024 Olympic logo etched into the case back. A really cool release, and obviously Omega being, a timing partner for the Olympics, it's a cool bit of history, and I'm sure that these will be collectible down the line. All right, one of the pieces I wanted to discuss, actually I think was released at Watches and Wonders, but it's from IWC, and I think IWC actually had a really, really strong year this year. And what I want to discuss was their new hand-wound IWC Portugueser Tourbillon Day-Night. This is a really beautiful, I believe it's a yellow gold cased Portugueser with a tourbillon at 6 o'clock and then a day-night indicator at 9 o'clock. It's got an obsidian lacquered dial with gold-plated hands. It's got, obviously, that tourbillon at 6 o'clock, a day-night indicator in the shape of a globe at 9 o'clock, and is running on the caliber 81925 manual wind movement from IWC. To me, I actually think this is one of the best looking pieces that have come out. It does give you sort of an aesthetic of the watches like the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak with the tourbillon, as well as the Overseas, but I actually think it is in a very attractive yellow gold case, beautiful black lacquered dial, and in some ways the proportion of this I think fit really, really well with the overall. The tourbillon isn't too large, the opening where the tourbillon sits isn't too large, so I do think it actually does really nice. When you flip it over, you actually have a really nice display case back of the movement with beautiful finishing on it, and I really do think this is one of the best looking pieces to be released this year. I encourage you to check the show notes of this podcast and you can see some images of it. But I do think, this is obviously a trend of watch brands sort of releasing tourbillon watches where you have the ability to see them. I think IWC executed this extremely well. The Portuguese is obviously an iconic case, and I just think the execution of it was really well done. So kudos to IWC. This past weekend was the Miami Grand Prix, and there was an announcement from H. Moser that they were releasing a blue streamliner skeleton cylindrical tourbillon to cement the partnership that they have with Alpina F1 team and Moser's new brand ambassador being Pierre Gasly. I think this is really cool. That's a brand, let's call it a independent watch maker, is actually getting into sports like F1. I think that's really, really cool. And obviously they released a limited edition I think, of 100 pieces of this blue Streamliner skeleton cylindrical tourbillon. They have now released a version for the Miami F1 race that is released in 20 pieces in pink. So it has a pink dial and pink strap that goes along with it. It's an interesting piece, probably not towards my aesthetic. I think I'd go with the blue version of it, but I think it's a really nice sort of step for a brand like H. Moser, which in my mind is, one of those, in my mind, is a smaller independent watch manufacturer, and it's cool that they're sort of getting the opportunity to collaborate with sporting events like the F1. It's a fairly simple piece. It's got the tourbillon at 6 o'clock, and then sort of this additional dial that's displayed on top of the skeletonized dial, where you can see the different parts of the movement. But it's a smaller sort of dial that sits towards where 12 o'clock typically is, and is in pink, obviously. 20 pieces limited edition. There's 100 of the blue version, so probably more likely to get the blue version of it, but a nice watch from Moser. The last release, I think, is probably the thing that was talked about the most on Instagram over the last several weeks, and that was the Tag Heuer and Kith Formula One Series 1 watches. They basically joined forces to create a collaboration that echoes the nostalgia of the Formula One released by Tag Heuer in 1986. This was sort of bringing back this fairly iconic quartz piece from Tag Heuer. If you don't know, the Tag Heuer Formula One Series 1 watches were launched in 1986 and were designed to embody the thrill and precision of Formula One. These pieces became pretty recognizable and quite known for sort of their sporty aesthetic and really bold colors and design and case construction. They also ran on quartz movements, which were easy for people to use. What they've done is collaborated with Kith, who have released essentially a limited version of these 10 new Formula One Series 1 timepieces. There is they use really bright and vibrant colors, which I think is quite attractive, and they are limited in production. So they're 35 millimeters in diameter in stainless steel cases with a 200 meter water resistance. They have the hours, minutes, and sensor seconds and date complications. You then have a couple of versions. So you have of the 1986 remake is limited to 1,350 pieces. There are 825 pieces of the green and blue models, and then 250 pieces of the global network, which the global network is essentially the locations of Kith. And then there are 75 pieces that come with the box set. If I was to pick one, I actually really like the multicolor Tag Heuer version with the green, yellow, and red aesthetic. But there are some really nice ones. I do think the Tag Heuer Formula One Kith Los Angeles is really nice, with sort of a gray case and blue bezel with white and red accents. I think that's a really nice overall piece. The full there'll be links in the show notes for you to see the full collection and read an article about them. So be sure to check out the show notes of this podcast if you want to see those. This is kind of a nice way of sort of making sure that you're not taking watch collecting too seriously. Have a little bit of fun. Find something that's been iconic. It truly is iconic and is a remake of something that I think will remain iconic. Obviously, these being in limited production will make these pieces quite collectible, I would imagine. And for those Tag Heuer fans or Kith fans or Kith and Tag Heuer fans, I think they symbolize a pretty cool part of a collection that you could make of these very limited pieces. So that is it for this week's podcast. I hope you enjoyed hearing some of the new releases. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these. Did you like the Bremont rebrand? What's your thoughts on the Streamliner or the IWC or the Formula One Kith? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So you can hit us up on our website or on our social media accounts. We'd love to chat about watches and always are available for those of you who would like to. If you are new to the Life on the Wrist podcast, be sure to follow us so you are notified when we upload our next episode of the season 5 of Life on the Wrist podcast. If you are feeling generous and wouldn't mind rating this podcast, it really does help me out. If you want to hear more from Life on the Wrist, be sure to look at the show notes. You can see our website, YouTube channel, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. With that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and until next time.